Welcome to our Green Terror Talk featuring beloved faculty, amazing alumni, and a super student who will focus our conversation on today's political climate. I'm Nikki Grandremo, class of 1998. I'm an Associate General Counsel for the United States Government, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mike Thomas.
Hey, my name is Mike Thomas. I'm a class of 2009 graduate. I'm currently serving the United States Senate as a legislative assistant for Maryland's own Senator Ben Cardin. Our goal here tonight is to give you a little bit of insight as to the importance of voting and hope that when you're done, you're going to mark your calendars for the November 3rd election. We're joined by Molly Van Loo, the class of 2008 graduate. Molly moved to DC upon graduation to work for her hometown congressman from Pennsylvania. Since then, she's worked in a variety of education, nutrition, and food policy positions, currently representing the fresh produce industry to increase Americans' access and consumption of fruits and vegetables. Alexandria Leonard, class of 2017, is a communications and digital professional that believes in electoral politics as a pathway to social change. She joins us for the talk, having studied political science and international studies, as well as religious studies. Alex chartered the Epsilon Gamma chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Inc., and currently serves the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Group. Her life's mission is to use storytelling, specifically in the digital and social space, to dismantle oppressive political systems for women and Black, Indigenous, people of color, and to create data-driven communication strategies, increasing accessibility to America's most vulnerable populations. I'm also proud to introduce Senator Ed Casemeyer, class of 1967. Ed has always been proud to be associated with the college and now has the honor of serving on the Board of Trustees and even taught a state and local government politics course last year. Public service has always been Ed's passion throughout his life, and he's had the privilege of serving for 32 years in Maryland's General Assembly, including the final 8 years as chairman of the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm proud to introduce super student on the Hill. Jessia Avila is a junior at McDaniel College who is majoring in political science and marketing with a minor in Spanish. She currently serves as an advocate for the world's poor at the Borgen Project. She hopes to foster support for marginalized and underrepresented peoples and promote educational advancement in her future career in public service. And we all know that political science and world issues could never be discussed on the Hill without pulling in Dr. Christiana Nichols-Leahy and Dr. Herb Smith into the conversation. Dr. Leahy has been at McDaniel College for 36 years, loving every minute of it, having the good fortune to work with some incredibly stellar students over the years, some of whom are with us today. When she got her PhD in 1989 from Georgetown University, she continued to teach here on the Hill because it's such a special liberal arts college. She continued to work as a human rights activist, serving on the board of Amnesty International for many years on the international humanitarian law with the International Institute of Humanitarian Law. She teaches courses on European and Latin American studies, American politics, conflict resolution, peacemaking, and peacekeeping, and still loves teaching the Introduction to Political Science class, in which she has had so many students over the years. And the man who really needs no introduction, Dr. Herb Smith. Herb has been working in the Centennial College Conference since 1964. First as a student at Ursinus College, then to the Johns Hopkins University, where he earned his master's and PhD. He joined the faculty on the Hill in 1973, serving there until his retirement in 2019, some 46 years. Herb is the co-author of Maryland Politics and Government, described as the gold standard of text on the Old Line State. In addition, Herb authored over 100 op-ed columns for the Baltimore Sun and other local newspapers. He conducted public opinion polling for WBAL-TV News and WBFF Fox News, and was a frequent on-air political analyst for CBS, NBC, and national public television affiliates in Baltimore. Welcome.
Great to be here.
As we head into our virtual homecoming and the election, it cannot be overstated how COVID-19 has truly upended our daily lives and permeated the minds of voters. The look and feel of this election cycle is going to be completely different. Mail-in ballots are going to replace election day voting lines, and politicos on TV are going to be looking at the postmark dates ballots instead of looking at the magic boards posting up the up-to-the-minute county election returns. A poll recently released by Goucher College noted that more than half of Maryland voters planned on using mail-in ballots this year, compared to just 5.6% of voters in the 2016 election who used mail-in ballots. What do we need to know about the actual mechanisms for voting in the upcoming election, particularly now that we're moving towards using mail-in ballots and having limited in-person voting opportunities? Dr. Smith?
Well, the first thing to recognize about all of this is that election administration in every state, in every county, in every subdivision is bipartisan. There are Republicans and Democrats in equal measure overseeing, monitoring, and administrating the process. So the idea that corruption could somehow creep into this has simply not been demonstrated in any empirical, valid, or legal sense over the past decades. Administration of elections is a very professional duty. I served on the Baltimore City Board of Election Supervisors for a number of years, and it's an interesting operation across the state of Maryland and across the country, because here's an organization that has to maintain itself for year after year after year, and then on just a couple of days every few years, it must be 100% accurate because every vote must count. And that is very much a sociological phenomena that's ingrained in the minds of the Republicans and Democrats who administer our elections.
Sure. Can you tell us anything about what will happen with kind of the mail-in ballots this year? I believe that there's still an opportunity to actually request your mail-in ballot in Maryland up till October 20th or so?
Well, as a legal resident of the Sunshine State, Florida, I'm a little bit at what I know about Florida is President Trump believes it's the only state in which you can have valid mail-in voting because he mails in his ballot here. It's very easy to vote by mail in Florida, and Beth and I plan to take our mail votes to a secure lockbox in one of the early voting sites that begin in Florida on October 19th. In Maryland, I've seen folks of Facebook friends who have been putting their ballots, their mail-in ballots, at lockboxes around the Free State.
Sure. And according to the Maryland State Board of Elections, you can still go to their website up until October 20th. The website is elections.maryland.gov. You're allowed to request your mail-in ballot either be mailed to you, or you can actually receive it emailed to you, and you can print it out and drop it in one of the lock boxes just to make it a little bit easier so you can actually make sure it's counted. And also there's an electronic tracking system that you're going to be able to look and make sure that your ballot is counted at some point. Do you think that we're going to be able to see kind of the results of the election on election night?
That's hard to say. I think a number of states, some jurisdictions are much more sophisticated than others. In Maryland, Montgomery County, usually have their total returns in 5 minutes after the polls have closed. Baltimore City, little more tardy, which has led to a number of political disputes in our history. But right now there's a considerable gap between the two candidates. I expect, however, that gap to close as election day nears. The thing to remember about all of this, and it's astonishing really, is 50%, fully half of all of our presidential elections could have been tipped in the other direction for the other candidate by a change of only 70,000 votes one way or the other scattered across the country. And of course, that was the case in 2000, it was the case in 2004, it was the case in 2016. So if it's a close election, we may be in for a long haul. I remember 2000 was not determined until the Supreme Court decision in Bush v. Gore. And that, if memory serves, was mid-December, late December, a Christmas present for George W. Bush.
The additional barriers put in place to vote due to the COVID-19 pandemic are likely to place a more significant burden on historically marginalized voters. What steps can we take to ensure that everyone is afforded the opportunity to vote?
I can talk about voter suppression and how that is going to affect the way voting takes place here in a couple of weeks. As we saw in the primaries, voter suppression was evident through purges of voter registration rolls, and that continually happens. And in that case, individuals are eliminated from rolls because they have not voted in several elections or have not confirmed their address. And oftentimes individuals are not noted of this status until they arrive to the polls on election day. And so a step we can take in this direction is to ensure that everyone is registered to vote and that they are taking steps to do that electronically. There's various resources, online resources, to check that information out. And as a result of COVID-19, we are also confronting the closure of polling places, such as churches and schools and libraries, and the consolidation of polling places as well. And so this disproportionately augments wait times and accessibility for marginalized peoples, especially voters with disabilities, students, the elderly, voters with low incomes, and individuals in rural areas who may not have access to the necessary transportation to safely reach new polling places. And in a report published by the Human Rights Watch in the past 2 weeks, their research emphasized the significance of in-person voting for Black, Latinx, and Native American individuals, especially those who have experienced violations in their voting rights. And so again, this can be solved by going to your state's, Board of Elections website and ensuring that your polling place has not changed, or if it has changed, that is noted and that necessary transportation steps can be taken to reach that location if necessary, or to request an absentee ballot, as we have seen across the nation. In relation to other forms of voter suppression, there have been premature deadlines to submit votes by mail, as well as proof of citizenship and voter ID laws. So all of these factors need to be considered when we are preparing to vote, and those factors need to be considered when we're looking at the website and ensuring that we're receiving accurate information.
I think for folks that are interested in engaging in that and making sure that their neighbors are registered and have a plan, there's resources online in which you can volunteer to do either phone or kind of texting to folks to make sure that they have the resources they need to get to request an absentee or get to the polling places.
I think that one more thing in regards to voter suppression that I would like to raise is that a lot of the people that we have deemed essential workers are also people who typically can't vote on election day. There are people who can't take off. They are people who have children at home who they need to care for. They live in multi-generational families, homes. And so it's also important to realize that while that the COVID-19 pandemic is weighing in disproportionately on these communities, the distance learning on top of having to work, on top of not having childcare, on top of so many other things, make people literally afraid to go and vote in person as well. If I live at home with my grandmother, I don't necessarily want to go out to vote and come in contact with all those people if I'm going to bring something home to them. So there's so many things that layer voting as a challenge for marginalized communities. And so it's important that as we think about our outreach, it's multi-dimensional, making sure that you're not only encouraging people to get mail-in ballots, if people do feel safe and comfortable to do so, to take people to the polls. I know Lyft and Uber also allow for free rides to the polls on election day. And even looking at like outside of Maryland, I always say we're blessed to live here where we have our Board of Elections posting where you can drop off your ballots. But in the state of Texas, there's one box per county and you're driving for hours to drop off your box if you choose to mail in your ballot or drop off your ballot. So it's important that wherever you live, you know the limitations of your state and what you can do to make sure that your voice is heard this election.
Those are all really good points. So for Senator Casemeyer, you were in the Maryland General Assembly when Maryland became the first state in the nation to enact the National Popular Vote Compact. Can you describe for us the Electoral College system under the Constitution right now, and then what the Maryland state law would do?
Well, just like to give you a little historical perspective on Electoral College, a very exciting subject, which many people like and some people very disparage. But it all started back in the presidential election of 1800, where Adam Burr and Thomas Jefferson actually tied electoral votes for the presidency. And at that point in time, our leadership realized that the founding fathers hadn't quite figured out how to make that a better process. So in 1804, the 12th Amendment was passed, which created the current Electoral College that we have. As you know, it's a winner-take-all system, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, which sort of have their own quirks. There are 538 votes available in the Electoral College. Each state, for each senator, each state gets one vote, and for each congressperson, you get a vote also. So that makes a total of 538. With the, also I forgot that Washington DC gets 3 votes also. So in order to be elected, you need a majority, you need 270 votes to become president. And obviously one of the downsides of the Electoral College is it is possible to win the popular vote and still lose the presidential election, as we've seen 5 times that has occurred. And as Herb mentioned, this election, who knows what's going to happen? But one thing Herb did mention is the fact that in 2016, Donald Trump, President Trump, won Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania by very narrow margins. In order to become president, you probably, for sure, have to win several of the swing states which are in play. There are 6 to 8 states, depending on where you're coming from. The problem that the president faces right now in Michigan and Wisconsin, it appears that Vice President Biden has a significant lead. In Pennsylvania and Arizona, he has a lesser lead, and in Florida, Vice President Biden has a small lead. So time is running out for the president to regain those leads in those states. So whoever wants to, Herb, you had your hand up.
Yeah, if I could interject. I mean, the problem with the Electoral College is that from the start, it has a reckless disregard for majority rule, which is, one of the fundamental principles of representative democracies. Back at the Constitutional Convention, James Wilson from Pennsylvania argued for the direct popular election of presidents. However, the secretary of the convention and the, quote, father of the Constitution, James Madison, objected because slaves wouldn't count. So basically, the Electoral College was founded on the original sin of the United States of America. In the Electoral College, back in pre-Civil War, slaves counted for 3/5 of a citizen. And it's probably not ironic that in the first 36 years of the Republic, 32 of those years were presided over by a president from Virginia.
What can we do to move on past this history that we have? Can we move to something that would allow for the distribution of electoral college votes based off the popular vote winner? Have we done something like that in Maryland?
Well, I mean, there's been movements, and we tried in Maryland, but you have to change the Constitution. You need 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 3/4 of the states.
3/4 of the states.
So it's a daunting process.
It actually passed the U.S. House of Representatives something like 323 to 70 back in 1969, but was filibustered to death in the U.S. Senate, direct popular election of the president. It's, given the original small state, large state Connecticut compromise that gives us a bicameral national legislature with 2 senators per state, regardless of population size, I wouldn't hold my breath for electoral college reform. The national compact is probably the only way in which there will be a better reflection of the popular vote with the actual electoral outcome.
Sia, can you provide any insight as to the level of voter engagement on the Hill right now with students, particularly as some students may be experiencing their voting for the first time?
There's a lot of energy and enthusiasm from the students. And again, this is even with the odd reality that we're seeing one another in boxes most of the time in terms of classes. But there's a great deal of energy, and we've gotten a lot of support from all elements of the college. The library has done a great deal to do outreach for voter registration. And I think the importance of voting has been impressed upon the students in ways that I think were lacking before. And I think a lot of that has to do with the events of this past summer, the COVID, madness that we've all been subjected to. And also the belief that in the past, and Herb and Ed can certainly reflect this as well, often students would say, oh, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, who you vote for. And I think we've learned that, no, it very clearly matters. And I think this particular group of students that are on the Hill right now, and I'm very hopeful about this, are really engaged, and they do understand how significant it is that their vote really matters and that they're getting other people out to vote. They're doing things, as Jessia and Alexandra were mentioning, in terms of in their own communities and with their friends, trying to literally steer them to the polls. We talk about, mobilization, and I always spend some time with students about what's the difference between just participating and mobilizing behavior. And it's literally getting people to the polls. Well, that's a whole new thing now, but just getting people to fill out the request for an absentee ballot or for a voter ballot by mail. But I do have hope in terms of voter turnout for this election, more so than I have in the past.
Jessia, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I would like to add to it. I would also like to mirror those sentiments and comments. I've also seen that on campus, that increased motivation and also an understanding of what's at stake in this election. The Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion has also worked really hard to empower marginalized voices and to have those conversations and those difficult discussions with students. And I think through those mediums and through those discourses, there's been an increased understanding of that necessity to engage, those conversations, through the vote and to really translate those ideas through your vote. So it has been very inspiring, and I have seen students, volunteer to help with voter registration and requesting an absentee ballot.
And Alex, do you think that the social justice movement that arose this summer has heightened people's desire to promote people getting out to vote? Or do you think it's just the COVID pandemic that has made people focus on this year's election more?
I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has made our communities smaller. It's made us recognize how interconnected we actually are. And what the Black Lives Matter movement has done has made other people, you're forced to pay attention to what that looks like. For Black and brown people, justice is on the ballot. Life and death is on the ballot in this election. And so what people are finally realizing is that we can no longer put up with what has been happening this far. And I think that because of, like, you had the death of George Floyd, followed by the death of Ahmaud Arbery, followed by the death of Breonna Taylor, and we were in a moment of immense grief as a country, as along with the pandemic, that, you know, we built up that community that people talk about so often. You had white people and Black people and brown people and gay people and lesbian people and trans people walking side by side, fighting together for the rights of our communities. And what I think about when I think about progress is that I think about those moments. You know, people want to talk about the rioting and the looting and things that happen, but the rioting is the knowledge and the voice of the unheard, and people are tired of not being heard. And so I think that we are in our current political system, voting is the way that you can be heard. You can literally kick people out. They can go, like, they have to go. And I think that people are using our learning to manipulate our current political system to speak their voices until we build a new one. And that could possibly be coming. There's so much new, refreshing energy that is happening now surrounding human rights and the rights of the American people, specifically those that have been marginalized.
Alex, I was really interested. You mentioned the building of a community towards elections and towards voting. What can we do with that community after election day? We can work towards that goal, but then how else can we stay involved? You have, you've continued with direct service organizations that have worked with individual members. Dr. Leahy, you work with nonprofit communities. Molly, you've worked both on the Hill, going from hill to hill, and then also kind of working with trade associations. What are the ways that, like, Green Terror, that members of the Green Terror community can stay engaged after November, make sure that, members of Congress, our state legislators, our local school board members continue to understand what their needs are and how to actively respond to them?
One of the things that I would say is making sure that you're holding them accountable. One of the being in the digital space, I know everybody is completely exhausted, have Zoom fatigue from this meeting and that meeting, hopping off and going to the next, but it has absolutely not, right? But it has allowed folks to be accessible right in their phones, right from their tablets, right at home into the political process, whether that means attending hearings, whether that means tweeting your congressman or your representative, whether that means phone banking or just copy and pasting that email. Digital storytelling and digital mobilization has been the way to make sure that communities are actively involved and engaged. And so it's important to not take a break after election day, but hopefully after whoever you wanted to get in gets in, you are working to hold them accountable to what they said they were going to do when they were running. And also making sure that as things transform, your needs are also being met. Working together and realizing that it's a big picture, working to see and also educating yourself that it's not enough to have Congress if the Senate is not going to do what support what you need, or if the justice system is not going to then provide justice to your family, or if your mayor is not doing what they're supposed to do. It's important that we educate ourselves on what is done at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, so that we can then hold our elected officials accountable for what they say they're going to do.
I would add the importance of directly communicating with your lawmakers. I know it's really easy to get jaded But we are unique in this country in that you have relatively direct access to your elected officials. So as Alex pointed out, certainly the digital engagement, I think sometimes people get disenfranchised from that too, because you kind of read the comments and they're in extremes, but you can have really meaningful, and that's very good for transparency, I think, overall. For lawmakers kind of moving to the digital space and to social media, but not to discount directly engaging and asking questions of your lawmakers, which can be direct meetings, emails, letters. Mike, I know we've talked about this before, but I think we each have worked for bosses on the Hill that do actually read the emails and letters that come in from their constituents, and it can really make a difference if you can tell your personal story and how policies are impacting you. And there's so much, I know people don't think that the presidency necessarily impacts their lives, and that's people, as was mentioned before, are understanding that it very much does, but there's so many departments and agencies that do make that trickles down from the presidency that make decisions that impact your personal lives, what's covered under your healthcare insurance. I know we have a lot of teachers that have graduated from McDaniel Department of Education, makes huge decisions kind of that impact, professionally. So having that direct engagement and then also getting involved in unions and trade associations and nonprofits that directly advocate on behalf of larger communities is really important. I think we also think of kind of lobbying as this ugly thing, but it can be a really great tool, and it is a great tool for folks to come together and advocate on behalf of community for change.
And Dr. Leahy, we've been such a divided country lately. What do you think the next president, whoever that may be, needs to do to bring the country back together and begin the healing process?
In some ways, I think that's going to be not as difficult as we think, right? Because right now it just seems, incomprehensible for someone to tackle that challenge. But I think it will be, if we do get a change, it will be so significant that people will begin to come together and realize that we now have a chance to repair the damage that's been done. And hopefully, again, I see the positive involvement of young people in ways that we haven't seen for many years. So I'm hopeful about that. But I don't think it's going to be as difficult as we might right now fear. And I'm usually the Cassandra, emphasizing how bad things really are. But I think that just having the opening that we're not going to continue with the kinds of, policies that we have been, and the kind of alienation of many groups in society that most previous presidents, just to put it in historical perspective, have not done. It's just not in the interest of the country to divide us. So I think we fall back on the more traditional politics in America. It is going to take some, reining in of the extremist forces. But as I said, I don't think it's going to be nearly as overwhelming as it feels right now. And others may disagree.
Do you have any comments on that?
Well, one thing I think we should recognize is you shouldn't look at American political history through rose-colored glasses. That we've always been polarized. The era of good feelings are remarkably few and far between. I'm a baby boomer. I grew up in the 1950s happy days. And that all ended with the assassination of JFK and the Vietnam War. The late 60s, early 70s, polarization was very intense and very meaningful. I must agree with my esteemed former always colleague, Dr. Leahy, that I think the forces that have been unleashed will be mitigated by a considerable extent by meaningful FBI intervention, as we had today in Michigan, and a celebration of diversity, which is normally strong American value, and the role of immigrants in building this work in progress that we call the United States of America, of simply accentuating the positives of diversity, of innovation and invention and creativity and the mixture of cultures and people. But always understand the potential for conflict is there and has certainly been evident in our past. So it's my feeling towards the United States is, love it warts and all. Understand the realities of it, but the realities should not blind us to the opportunities and the promise and the continued progress that we can make. Sounds like I'm running for office.
Any
Sure.
final thoughts from the panel as we say goodnight? Encouragement to get out to vote? I'll go through each of you. Dr. Leahy, final thoughts for the night.
Vote, vote, vote. Just get out there and vote. And as our students have told us, there's all kinds of ways that you can get involved after you vote as well. So use your, right to vote, and then use the accountability factor that you have after you vote so that the people you voted for are responsible and accountable to you.
Thank you, Dr. Leahy. Dr. Smith, final thoughts for the night.
I can only echo Dr. Leahy that voting is instrumental. The League of Women Voters slogan, democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to get in there, you have to participate. And the easiest form of participation is the simple act of voting. So I urge each and every person, call your friends, call your lists, and get everyone to the polls.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Senator Casemeyer, final thoughts for the night.
Well, speaking of voting, I can only recount the first time I ran for the House of Delegates, I won by 4 votes. So every vote is important. But in terms of a message, don't get discouraged. We're still the greatest country in the world, and things will settle down. I'm hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Casemeyer. Alex, final thoughts for the night.
Yeah, I think along the lines of voting, as a Black woman, I remember there was a time that my people couldn't vote. And my oldest ancestor, my oldest ancestor and my oldest living elder could not vote during that time. So I know what that is like, and I understand the importance of voting. And so I want to just echo those sentiments. And lastly, I also think voting is a way of fighting, and we can fight for every issue at the same time. We don't have to put one thing first. We don't have to put climate change first or then student loan debt first. There is no order to these issues. Our lives are depending on fighting for everything with all we got at the same time, and just use whatever gifts you have to continue that fight. Whether you're an artist, use your art. Whether you're a writer, use your writing skills. Whether you're a finance person, help us get this budget together. Whatever you can do to change the world, you can do that, and we're waiting for you.
Thank you, Alex. Molly, final thoughts for the night.
Sure. So I think for those voting absentee in particular, there's a unique opportunity this year to do real research for down ballot candidates. I think if everybody's being honest, they don't always do that, right? You kind of get in there and panic because you didn't do your research. So one, utilize that to do your research. And if you go in person, you should also do that as well. I'm a Washingtonian now, so my vote is, in many cases, doesn't really count on things. So I'll speak to, my heart is still in Pennsylvania. And I know we have a lot of alum from Pennsylvania, and given that they're a swing state, definitely encourage everybody to vote, but putting an extra plug in there for Pennsylvanians too.
Thank you, Molly. Jasia, final thoughts.
Yes, I'd like to add that during this time, as turmoil and chaos has become the norm, that we need to think back to as Alex was saying, the value of the vote and the voices that it represents. You know, there's so many individuals in this country who are scared to vote because they've been made invisible, they've been silenced, you know, through the rhetoric of you know, the administration and just these collective sentiments that have just been really damaging. So I think as we go in and vote, you know, we should remember that it's not just our voice, but the voices of others who cannot, and the voices of people that, you know, that we will be able to help afterwards, hopefully, if there's a change.
Thank you, Jasia.
I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for contributing your insights in our conversation tonight. And Green Terror Nation, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
I agree. This has been fun, Mike. And for all of you alumni out there, I encourage you to take advantage of the upcoming homecoming events. And on behalf of our panel, please get out there and vote. Thank you and good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, good night. Thank you.
Bye, Herb.
Nikki,
Yeah, Christiana.
Molly,
Yeah.
Alex, Senator,
Thank you, Herb. See you.
take care.